On November 9, 2006, the American Dental Association released a warning that fluoridated water should not be mixed with concentrated formula or foods intended for babies 1 year old and younger. Most mothers across the nation never heard about it. On December 15, 2006, the Centers for Disease Control released the same warning, also stating that mixing fluoridated water with concentrated formula or foods intended for babies 1 year old and younger may increase the risk of enamel fluorosis. Once again, mothers around the nation were left clueless.
I think the ADA's recent statement on warning against adding fluoridated water to baby formula is a watershed decision.
The American Dental Association has finally done what it should have done years ago, and that is to tell parents not to use fluoridated tap water to make up formula.
The American Dental Association recommends that we not have fluoridated water be used for making infant formula or for infants to drink.
One of the messages which I think is extraordinary in this whole issue is that the level of fluoride in mother's milk is so extremely low. It's 0.004 parts per million, which is 250 times less than we put in the drinking water.
There have been a couple men who have said, well, maybe mother's milk is flawed, but most scientists don't go that route. They say mother's milk seems to be the best we have, the best we know of, and if it's low in fluoride, maybe that's what we should have for infants, is low fluoride.
Nature has devised a system for keeping fluoride away from the infant, and we're circumventing that by putting fluoride into drinking water. And I think there are consequences.
I think parents should know that fluoride is an extremely active chemical when it gets into our body. It can interfere with the pineal gland. It can interfere with the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland and the pineal gland are both intimately involved with brain development, mental development.
A real concern with young kids, especially with newborn infants, is that the blood-brain barrier is not fully developed at that point, and when children are drinking a formula made with fluoridated drinking water, they're getting a huge an inappropriate dose of fluoride in the developing brain. This may be part of the reason, for instance, of the depression of IQ that we've seen in these Chinese studies.
You do not want to create a fluoride exposure during a period of brain vulnerability.
All of these things are indicators, serious indicators, that you shouldn't expose young babies to fluoride. And of course that's exactly what happens when you put fluoride in the water.
How are low-income kids supposed to, or low-income families, supposed to avoid giving their kids fluoridated water?
They can't afford to avoid it. They can't afford to seek sources of drinking water that has no fluoride in it.
I think that the low-income communities could be at higher risk for adverse effects from fluoride exposure or from water fluoridation.
What you really need to look at and what matters at the end is what's your total body load.
Children are getting a lot of fluoride from a lot of different sources.
We've had a tremendous increase in fluoride from many sources. Water is one source. When we drink that water and when it's made into soda pop or it's made in beverages and made into soups, made into other products, we get fluoride from that source also.
And we also have a lot of pesticides that have come on the market that leave fluoride residues on fruits and vegetables.
Fluoride is a very common component in pesticides. And so, if you drink a glass of grape juice that's a non-organic grape juice and it's got skins on it, you're going to get a very high level of fluoride just from your grape juice.
And they're also getting it from toothpaste. Studies have shown that you swallow quite a bit of toothpaste, or the children swallow quite a bit of toothpaste. Even if they're told not to swallow it, it just happens by accident. They don't rinse as well as adults, and sometimes they don't have as good swallowing actions. And therefore they're getting a lot of fluoride from that.
So who's monitoring this exposure of when are we getting too much? No one's monitoring that. Nobody's looking at the total exposure to ensure that we're not getting too much and that certain subgroups aren't getting too much.
The reality is we need to reduce our fluoride intake.
In 2005, the Center for Disease Control admitted that 32% of our children in the United States, including children in non-fluoridated areas, have dental fluorosis.
About a third of the children in this country have some form of dental fluorosis, meaning that they had too much fluoride exposure during their early childhood.
Dental fluorosis is damage to the tooth because of too much fluoride exposure. We swallowed too much fluoride, and it shows up as white spots, brown spots on the teeth.
You see these white spots or splotches or lines. In more severe fluorosis, you actually see the surface layer flaking off. You see brown spots.
And in severe cases, there's actual chipping and pitting and erosion of the tooth.
Dental fluorosis is a biomarker that your child has been overexposed to fluoride during the development of their teeth.
We now believe that there are several mechanisms involved. Fluoride could be inhibiting the enzymes, the serine proteinases that are degrading the final traces of proteins that are left behind in the teeth.
The mechanisms have something to do with interference with the enamel-forming proteins or inhibition of some enzymes during that critical period.
To do that, impacting those the enamel cells in the teeth, means that it can also impact cells elsewhere in the body.
The promoters have always had this faith that you could damage the growing tooth enamel, the enzymes, the G proteins, or however that happens, without damaging any other tissue in the body at the same time. And I think that's very unlikely.
Not only is it an effect on teeth, what's happening in the teeth is very likely happening in the bone as well, because we have the similar kind of structure of hydroxyapatite mineral structure in the bone and the tooth.
Your teeth are sort of a window into the bone, a window into your skeleton.
So if there's this adverse effects going on in the teeth, there are very likely to be adverse effects going on in the bone.
It's a sign of toxicity. It is not just to be taken or dismissed as merely a cosmetic effect.
My name's Vivian Howard. I'm the Professor of Bioimaging here at the University of Ulster in Coleraine, and I'm a medical pathologist and toxicologist, and my research over the past 20 or 30 years has involved looking at the effect of toxic substances on development in the fetus and the infant. This is generally recognized as an area of, or a period of life when you're especially vulnerable to certain effects. I guess the thing that got me interested in fluoride in the first place was the very, very low levels that you find in human breast milk, 5 parts per billion. What that tells me is that throughout evolution we've built up a special mechanism for keeping fluoride away from the developing infant. Nature has devised a system for keeping fluoride away from the infant, and we're circumventing that by putting fluoride into drinking water. And I think there are consequences. So the question is, why is it that nature has devolved a system which specifically keeps fluoride away from the infant? And the answer is, it's a developmental toxin, and in particular it's a neurotoxin. I mean, there's lots of epidemiological evidence now that, for example, it might affect the intelligence of the child, coming out of China, and that's been reviewed by the National Academy of Sciences. They say that you can't be absolutely certain about it, but there's quite a strong indication, and we need further research. There have also been other studies which show that it might be able to affect hormonal systems, endocrine systems, in particular thyroid levels, and that can have an effect on IQ in developing children. If you take the normal range of thyroid in the mother, then there's a difference in intelligence of the offspring between the mothers who have the upper limit of normal range and the lower limit of the normal range of thyroid hormone. So, you know, we're tinkering with quite a sensitive system. So the evidence is out there for us to have to say that we've got to be very careful. And my opinion is that there isn't a satisfactory one-dose-fits-all solution through treating a whole population via tap water. There are going to be some members of that population which will be more at disadvantage than others, and they will obviously include the fetus and the infant, but at the other end of life, people who've got marginal kidney function will be more susceptible. And therefore, I don't think on a precautionary basis that we should be continuing the fluoridation of drinking water supplies. If governments don't have ways of making sure that people in the areas that are fluoridated who are susceptible, like bottle-fed babies, are actually stopped from being exposed in that way, then they have no right really to be using a mass medication like this.